Namaste and welcome to Flutter Appwrite series. In this series, we are building a time tracking application from scratch using Flutter and Appwrite. In the last episode, we set up riverpod to use to manage state of our application. In this episode, we are going to set up routing in our project using GoRouter as well as learn how to use riverpod to provide our routing state to our application. Before we start, if you find my videos beneficial, don't forget to like, share and subscribe so that others may benefit from it as well. Now, let us get started setting up GoRouter in our project. First thing we need to do is we need to add a package GoRouter. Ah, 1301. Let's run flutter pub get. Next, in our lib folder, we want to create a folder called router and then router.dart. Here we will import GoRouter and we will begin setting up our routes. We will set up our routes using riverpod so that we can use our application state inside our routing logic as well. So let us also import riverpod. Let's set up a router provider GoRouter. So we are using a simple provider to provide our GoRouter instance. It will take a reference and we will return GoRouter and we need to provide routes. The first route will be our root route, which we can do GoRoute and path will be root, and then we can provide here in the builder context state we can return homepage widget. Now we need to create our homepage widget as well. In the main app right now we don't have any homepage widget. We are simply using scaffold. Inside lib, let's create our homepage widget. Homepage.dart. Here we will create import material and then create a stateless widget called homepage. This will return scaffold. Let's call it home, body in the center, child. Let's add this. Let's add const everywhere required. Now we have our home page. Let's also give it a name. And we can use this name in our route definition. Homepage.name, and here we want homepage. So we have our basic router. Next, we need to use this router in our material app. To do that, first we need to read the provider. As we have set up this router using riverpod, now we'll learn how we can consume this state in our application. So let us wrap our material app with a consumer app. Wrap with builder. This builder will be called consumer. The consumer comes from riverpod package, and consumer builder gives us three things: context, reference to the provider, and then child. Now we need our router, so we can do router equals ref watch. We need to watch our router provider, right? Now we have an instance of our router which is GoRouter. To use this router in our material app, we need to use a named constructor called router. So material app dot router, and this requires router config, which is simply the GoRouter instance that we have here, router. Now we can remove this. This is not a constant value, so let us remove the constant. We now have our basic routing logic setup. You can see we have defined router using provider, and then we also learned how to consume the provider to get the value and use it inside our application. Finally, we can run this application. Let's see, it doesn't have a device. Let's select Mac OS and then run and debug. In this episode, we learned how to set up router in our application. We also learned how to use riverpod to provide data to our application. We have some issues here while running in Mac OS. The problem is the Flutter Web Auth requires the minimum of version 10.15, and I think the minimum set is 10.14. So what we can do is we can simply replace search for 10.14 and replace it with 10.15. We can also do this by opening our project in Xcode and then replacing these values. Let's try to build again, run and debug. Let's see if it works this time. Okay, it's making bunch of changes to our port file, and port file lock is generated. Flutter launching. Give it a second. It will take some time because this is the first time we are building our application. Our application is now running. As you can see, we have our home page being run over here. This is all for today's episode. I hope this episode was helpful for you to learn the basics about GoRouter as well as riverpod. This is all for today's episode. Let us commit our changes. Set up GoRouter and push it to GitHub. Thank you. See you again in the next episode.